digging deeper into wonders of spiritual unfoldment. I know some of you are reading along because I heard from some friends of mine that they started reading this book, John, and they cannot put it down.
Ah, that's nice. That's encouraging. That's what I like to hear.
We're moving on to chapter 9. This is one of my favorite, is maybe the wrong word, but this chapter hit home hard for me, and it's titled Surprised from Farming, 1986.
Yes.
And in the first paragraph, you write about where you making a selection for your writings.
Yes.
And you go into a glimpse of what lies beyond. And what really stood out to me, I highlighted, all seem as nothing compared to these moments of truth, which shine out as lamps guiding me home after long years of exile in a foreign land.
Yes, exactly. It's just like that.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because you talk a lot about darkness and semi-darkness, and then your adventures and depression you've struggled with.
Yes. Well, you see, how could I possibly write that unless I'd had a glimpse of beyond? And it's these blessed glimpses of beyond that gradually illustrate to us our normal condition, which in contrast seems so dark and limited and really not really life at all, not really alive, fully alive at all. And this process goes on really all one's life. The higher your vision, the brighter the light, by which I don't just mean brightness in moving from a 60-watt bulb to a 100 one, that sort of thing. It's sort of it's different. You can't really make a sort of physical comparison like that. It's you see, beyond the normal thinking mental process, higher consciousness doesn't really have a descriptive language, certainly not one that you can use to bring down to earth and explain to readers. So how do you know it's happened? Well, all you can really know is how cumulatively, over many years, it sort of penetrates your the way you behave on this earth. And when people say they see something in me, well, what is it? I can't put my finger on it. I don't know, but it's something makes people often come quite long ways to see me. What for heaven's sake? What have I got? I'm just a very ordinary old man, but you see, what is it? Something from a higher world seems to have somehow sunk into my thick head, and otherwise I couldn't talk the way I do, could I? People wouldn't come to see me, would they? And then it's so subtle and gradual over such a long period. Someone was saying we were walking, a little group of us were walking down the church path, and someone was saying, it's so different to how life normally is. And I'm a bit sort of stuck in my routine now. I live a fairly quiet and regular life, and I myself almost forget what normal life is. Agitated, rushing about from one thing on the computer to the telly to something else, to some meeting, talk all the time, jump in a car, rush off somewhere, meetings, timetables, all these things. Well, yes, does that sort of life really exist? Well, obviously, perhaps the majority of people, that is what life is. And and this sort of rather vague thing you call spiritual life, well, what on earth is it? It's I'm not sure myself. I'm not sure that I can tell you really, but these glimpses of beyond, I suppose, over a long life, they gradually add up and sort of acquire sort of reality. You see, I can't really explain it, can I? Sort of fumbling about with words. Of something of you get some sense of what I'm talking about.
I think you're doing a great job explaining the unexplainable. That's one thing I noticed reading your books, John, that you have an ability, call it like you said, something from above to guide you to put it into words. In this chapter, Surprise from Farming, I know you have a great love for animals, and I know a lot of you listeners are animal lovers. Can you talk a little bit about farming and the surprise from farming and suffering of animals, something I personally, obviously really struggle with?
Well, it's a big subject. How can I summarize it? I suppose as a very small boy, I was aware of dealing with because there were a lot of horses around when I was a boy, and not that I ever saw much cruelty. Really, most people who work with horses are kind, are naturally kind to them. Something about a horse that makes the people that work with them, or most of them, gentle, thoughtful people. But certainly I saw death very much so from a very early age. I remember I must have been a very small child when I first saw rabbits being killed, and then I remember sheep lambing and seeing a dead lamb. Well, first of all, seeing lambs born and that extraordinary sort of messy business that birth is, and then the ewe lies down and shows obvious signs of pain and labor, and then she heaves and heaves, and out comes this sort of wet and floppy thing that doesn't look much like a lamb, and it sort of gradually fumbles around, gets to its feet. It's all these made a deep impression on me as a child. Remember how upset I was once at thrashing time. There was of course, the combine harvesters weren't invented then. There was no fashioned traction engine with a big thrashing machine, and there was a pile of chaff. And a little mouse was sitting on this pile of chaff. And of course, a man went up with a stick and killed it, and I was upset. Poor little mouse. I saw lots of things like that as a child, and as they sank into my childish mind. And then when I had my own first land, I remember what a shock it was when I realized I couldn't walk over the grass with my big hobnailed boots without hurting the grass. That was a huge shock to me. How could I, who loved the land so much, not walk over it without hurting it? And then I had my own animals and had to send my pigs to the market and send my lambs away. And so all the time my mind was working as to what this pain that's so evident in farming, this constant killing, this bringing things to life and then killing them again. What's it all about? And how could I, who loved it all so much, be a partaker in all this destruction? Then, cutting the heads off lettuces and cabbages. They're awful, poor things. How would we like to have our heads cut off like that? And pulling fruit off a tree, ow! And pulling a carrot from the ground. We're killing it, aren't we? Poor carrot. Wait, he doesn't want to leave. Just imagine being pulled out of this world like that. Just pulled out. we're so insensitive. We don't feel these creatures, don't feel them saying ow when these things happen. But in our moments of clarity, you may hear them. Oh, it's not a scream you could hear with these ears, but there's a sort of scream they make which you can hear inwardly. Lots of things like that. A lot of people instinctively don't like to pick flowers, do they, and bring them into the house. It seems sort of something wrong about it. Why should you pick a flower and its beauty and then stick it in a glass vase and bring it into a house? Christmas trees, what on earth are we doing cutting off these lovely young things and covering them with electric gadgets in a hot, stuffy room, to give us pleasure? What about the poor tree? Do you think it enjoys it? Well, maybe it does. I don't know. Some people think it does. I'm not sure that I do. We're very odd, aren't we? Odd creatures. Incredibly insensitive people are. I think really we're about most least sensitive creatures in the whole world. Far from being the most developed, I think we're unbelievably undeveloped, really, in the finer senses. And then what's this business about birds pecking worms to death? Poor worm. What a fate. Why? And all this I was thinking about, well, what is man? And why is man at the center of it all? And what can man do or be to try to alleviate it all? And I began to understand now what I call sin, that man is really in truth a spiritual being. If you like, I used to think, well, how is it that fairies can sit on flowers and not hurt them? And people have to go and tread on the grass and hurt it and pick the flowers. Fairies, as far as we know, don't. Fairies just sit on the flowers and do nice things. Why can't I be a fairy? Why have I got to be a great clumsy man? I think really this is what got me going in the spiritual life, because I realized that fairies have got it right, really, that we should be able to live like fairies without hurting things. And then I sort of thought of it a bit more in terms of spirit. So really, I think I started spiritual work really out of my love for animals and nature and trying to sort of help, really. I kept pigs at one time, and these, of course, produced lots of piglets, had a lot of sows, and these had to periodically go off to be killed. And I started going with them in the lorry. They were taken away in a lorry then to the slaughterhouse in the nearby town. I started going with them, and I'd stand with my pigs. The men were all very kind to me. I always rather liked men that worked in those places. They got a real, but sort of, I don't know. Anyway, they were always very nice to me and allowed me to go in there and stand with my pigs while they were being killed. And I felt that I'd started to meditate not long before that. And I thought that by just standing there in stillness, that in some way for some sort of comfort, because of course the stillness isn't killed. The stillness is indestructible. The stillness is eternal. Whereas the pig's life was a temporal thing being taken away from them. And just as it were, hold the pig's hands as they went through the process of being killed, I felt was the best possible service I could be to my pigs. Yes, I've always felt that. And in a way, that's what permeated my farming more and more. I felt that my farmer's first duty really was to be that indestructible spiritual presence that held and comforted my plants and animals while they were being manipulated for the service of men. Yes, that gave a real incentive to my spiritual practice, because I was doing it for what I loved. to help the creatures and plants I loved so much. I was doing it for their sake. And then that gradually widened out to include the world of people. Yes, of course, as a young boy, I joined all the organizations that existed then, Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and League Against Cruel Sports and all these sort of things that were just coming into existence then. But then it sort of moved beyond condemnation of these things into a higher reality, a greater responsibility, which involved spiritual work. And see, now I can hear of death, hear of or witness death, in total confidence that the real essence of the creature dying is immortal and does not die. The monstrosity of death gives way to just a sort of temporal phenomena within the greater eternity, within the greater reality, that the spiritual essence is undisturbed. Now I'm old and I face my own death. I've got to practice what I preach. It's happening to me now. And this is so obviously the most important work in old age is to hold on to the eternal and let the temporal take its course. That's a great promise of religion, isn't it? Eternal life. Which is not just for man, it's for everything. This world is a transitory world. Sorry, I've waffled on a long way from your question, haven't I?
I don't think so, John. I think you answered it beautifully. In this chapter 9, you talk about the cow that had a prolapse.
Yes.
And out of this experience of being with the cow and the vet on page 70, you then had an experience, and you write, I saw heaven, I saw the shining world, I saw her soul ascend and be welcomed. Can you talk a little bit about this, being in the situation with this cow suffering and dying, and then having this experience of beyond?
Well, I can't say why it happened. It was just like that for me, and I've had many I won't say similar experiences, because one of the features of spiritual life is that it never repeats. I've been meditating 60 years. I don't think I've ever had two meditations the same. It's like when you never see the same sunset, do you? The sky is never, ever the same. And there's clever people who know say that every snowflake is different. Certainly every person's face is different. So everybody, usually when they get their first spiritual experiences, they're thrilled by it and write down descriptions and say, this is how it is. Well, in this case, I did that. But of course, there's no reason why anybody else should have anything similar. They may be sort of vague semblances, but it won't be exactly the same. And I've never had exactly the same experience. But on this occasion, how did I describe it? Something opened up and I was shown. It was like a window. And this is how, in fact, it happens. It's you can't bring these things about by yourself, but it's rather like on a cloudy day when the clouds pass and suddenly, unexpectedly, you get a glimpse of blue sky and the sunshine. This is exactly what happens. The clouds of the mind, the normal obscurity, which in a way fogs our higher vision, holds us within this lower reality. Sometimes it just opens up and, good heavens, you see something. And then it closes again, and good, what was that? And on this occasion, I just happened to write it down. And so now, 60, 70 years later, we're talking about it. But certainly, in that higher reality, you are taken beyond death that is such a feature of this lower reality. You know, the higher reality, there's no death at all. It's only down here, as it were, beneath the clouds, that separation and death and disease and all these powers of darkness exist. That's why wise people tell us, rather than trying to change this, which is just, going out of the frying pan into the fire, the blind leading the blind, the real salvation for man is to discover this. And then, like switching on a light in a dark room, what happens to the darkness? Where does it go? You wake up, as it were, from the nightmare, and the dark ceases to exist. But of course, it doesn't happen all at once. It may take many years and many experiences before, because this darkness is pretty much embedded in the human psyche, and we hold on to it like grim death, because this is what we consider normality. And we're afraid of this because either we deny it or we're afraid of it, or for 1,000,001 reasons, we hang on to this and don't want that. Extraordinary, really, but that's how we are. We hang on to our limits. Better the devil we know, or shall we think? A few adventurous souls will venture into the unknown, go off into the uncharted sea. There aren't that many of us who'll do that. We start and then we get a bit nervous or a bit frightened, or we find it too much effort. The world, the comforts of this world call us back. And the Bible's, or Jesus said several parables about that, stories about it, didn't he? About the sower sowing the seed, and many are called, but few are chosen. It's always been like that, so it seems. But depends what you really, really want in life. And I think for me, I felt so deeply the pain of nature. There weren't that many people when I was young who, now the whole world seems to have got the message that, we're destroying the world. And we need to do something about it. But when I was thinking that way as a young man, there were very few really who were thinking like that. I was considered a bit crazy, really, a bit unreal. Now you see, I'm on internet, for heaven's sake, people listen to me. Oh, well.
Animals are so in the moment.
They are. They're the great teachers, my God, they are. Yes. Yes. I do think they are. They are the angels. Yes, I still think of, throughout my whole life, nature's been my book of God, my first primary teacher. I've never really followed a human way. Trust nature. Where does nature end and spirit or God begin? It's all, I couldn't tell you.
We've talked about this in previous recordings, John, about, we read the books and we go to the retreats and we ask questions, but the more I listen to you, and I observe this, it's always coming back to, as you call, doing the work. So
Yes.
what is all the other, is that stages of our learning, our evolution, or is it avoidance behavior? I wonder, of just stillness, being present, the meditation.
Well, we're not taught it. So unfortunately, unless something has happened to open your eyes, we simply don't know any better. I think that's it, really. I'm not too keen on sort of modern psychology. You know, I never heard of that phrase. You just use avoidance behavior. It sounds, makes me feel a bit nervous. but I think a rather more old-fashioned term is you don't know any better. Or as Jesus said from the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Man is an ignorant creature, you know, he's unbelievably ignorant. It's funny, isn't it? It almost instinctively, we know it. That's why we always feel this obligation to go and get educated, which arguably makes us even more ignorant, teaching us worldly knowledge, whereas the real knowledge is, of course, knowledge of God, the spiritual knowledge. You can go on learning about this world till all your life, but so what? When you die, you leave it behind, won't you? Why not learn something useful that you can take with you beyond the grave? That's worth learning, isn't it? Otherwise, you can have a head full of knowledge. And what happens? It just goes into the grave to be eaten by worms. So why not learn about the eternal life? Which that's not taught, isn't it? You know, I suppose some religions do, but a good many modern versions of religions now are so concerned with human issues that they've almost forgotten about spirit. This world, it's insistent, isn't it? This world. What about me? It says me all the time. My own self-interest, human self-interest. What about the animals? What about the grass? What about the fairies? Oh, well, that's another subject, isn't it? For another day. I won't wander off too far. That one.
John, I know you have a lot of young listeners, and maybe someone that's listening to this recording for the first time, or they have not listened to the previous chapters of this book's recording. What would be a recommendation you would give for someone just to start?
Stop talking. Number one. Well, it's 7:30 on a winter evening, dark outside, cloudy sky. Well, if you had some stars outside, look at them. Look through the window, turn the light off, look outside at the stars, dear. Or if you've got something to look at outside the window other than another building, look at a tree, look into a dog's eyes. Just by keeping silence, immediately, so simply, you see another world opens up, doesn't it? A world other than this incessant chatter of rubbish that's coming out of the human mouth. Just by being silent, it opens up, doesn't it? A whole new dimension of existence. Silence is so important. This is a first step, the sort of the first glimpse into the infinite world. In this world, everything changes, but silence is always the same, isn't it? Wherever you go, all over the world, silence is there, always present. Just stop talking, my dears. Listen. Become acquainted with silence.
I feel weird talking now, John, but we are recording.
Well, if we're with a bit of practice, you know, you can talk in silence, because the silence, we're both sitting in a room, aren't we? And each of our rooms is actually filled with silence, isn't it? The space of the room is filled with silence, and also space. And does that silence end with the walls, or doesn't it just penetrate the wall and reach out into the night? Reach over the oceans, over the mountains? Isn't it the same silence for you as for me? One silence. And isn't that silence also still? You and I are talking within it, but the silence is undisturbed. We are moving, our lips are moving, we're rubbing our eyes, but the silence, the stillness is undisturbed. You and I change, the silence, the stillness are unchanging. We talk a lot about peace, don't we? How can I find peace? Well, my dears, what is this if not peace? And what is this if not freedom? Freedom from our crazy minds and all the bothersome people out there. Freedom, peace, presence, spirit. Presence of what? Oh, eternal one. It's not divided, is it? The same for everybody in the whole world. One conscious being. You might even be bold enough to call it God. And in that silence, there's no problem, is there? No question, no doubt, no problem, but total safety and all-embracing love. No criticism, no judgment, nothing unpleasant at all. And what did Jesus say? Come unto me, beloved, come home.